to be brief. I will take about 10 minutes and talk about what our organization has been doing to drive value chain transformation, all around the theme of embracing sustainability, innovation, research, and competitiveness in agriculture. We are proud to be associated with ASNED. A little bit about myself. I'm a director at Lattice. I'll tell you about Lattice in a minute. We work with business leaders to help them address complex, consequential questions. Over the last decade, I have worked with mid-sized and large businesses across East Africa to answer the question of how do you unlock growth. Our work spans every sector of the economy. Prior to going into advisory work, I led the retail banking business at DTB. Before that, I was led product development at Equity Bank. And before that, I worked in financial services, quite frankly, around the world. I have an MBA from the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State, as well as executive education at York University's Schulich School of Business in Toronto. So my background is business. I'm not an academic. We've done a lot of work in financial services and in agribusiness. In fact, our three themes at Lattice are aqua, agribusiness, and access to finance. So what do we do? A little bit about ourselves. We really believe in the idea of shared prosperity. If you try and prosper alone, you will have a very short journey. So whatever you do, you have to ask yourself, how do you carry people along with you? Not only that, but we have the view that the linchpin to improving economic outcomes is productivity. If you pick any two individuals, any two families, any two communities, any two societies, those differences in economic outcomes are almost always reflective of productivity differences. Of course, the complex question is what shapes productivity differences? And that is what we have spent the last 2 decades trying to answer, and we're here to talk about. Now, when Lattice started, okay, the screen is off, the slide. Thank you. When Lattice started 21 years ago, we're a 21-year-old advisory firm. We were a bunch of financial service professionals who were very familiar with the fact that most enterprises in Kenya couldn't access money, couldn't access funding. And we all know this. If you talk to your friend or your relative, everybody likes to say, the reason I am not successful or the reason I've not grown is because I need money. So we set up a corporate finance practice to help small, mid-sized, and large businesses access money. But as soon as we started doing that, we also discovered that most of these businesses had difficulty articulating what their vision was, what their big story was, where they wanted to be, and that led us to our strategy practice. So in addition to doing corporate finance, we also work with businesses across East Africa to help them do their strategic planning, articulate a vision of where they want to go. Then we did that very well for a few years, and then what we found is that people are now saying, okay, now I need to grow, what do I do? And we know that the only way you grow is by going after new customers, introducing new products to the market, or entering new geographies. So we started our market entry practice to help Kenyan and European businesses enter markets across East Africa. Now, when we come to what we're talking today with the Agricultural Sector Network, and again, the market entry work that we began, that we did for a European client more than 10 years ago, led us deep into aquaculture and the blue economy and the fish sector. And what I will do is I'll take about 5 or 6 minutes to talk about some of the learnings we have had in driving transformation there and sustainability. I suspect that everybody in this room knows that whether you think about him or not, the smallholder farmer is at the center of everything we do. And there's several reasons for this. We all know that 70% of Kenyans, let's go to the next slide, please. 70% of Kenyans work directly or indirectly in agriculture. So if you're trying to achieve any kind of change, when we talk about sustainability, you cannot do that without thinking about the smallholder farmer. When you come closer to this smallholder farmer, I think most of us would agree that the picture is not very pretty. Reports from FSD and others suggest that almost half of the smallholder farmer's income, or the small agribusiness income, is spent on food. Okay, they spend about 48% of their income on food. They spend about 12% on education. The long and short of it is there's not a lot of discretional income to improve outcomes because they spend all their time just surviving, literally. And so when challenges happen, let's go to the next slide. When challenges happen, life comes to a standstill. Somebody falls sick, they can't work on their farm, they can't pay a hospital bill, they can't send a child to school, life comes to a stop. And then the other thing that we find very interesting, just give me the next slide, is that, and we all know this, that the typical farm or agribusiness household has 7 to 14 different income streams. Most people in this room have at most 2 or 3 income streams, but when you look at a small agribusiness, they have 14 different gigs or hustles they're chasing. But in any case, with that profile, the question we've been asking ourselves and answering in part is, what kinds of interventions do you bring so that you can sustainably improve outcomes, improve competitiveness? And I'll just share with you a few examples. Next slide. Thank you. We're all familiar with value chains, but we want to suggest that the smallholder farmer or the smallholder agribusiness is at the center of it. When you start thinking about a problem as weighty and as complex as this, the hardest question is always, where do you begin? And the truth is, you could begin anywhere. A friend of mine says you can start anywhere so long as you go everywhere. But we have found that we all know feed and fertilizer drive 70% of our costs in production. So that's a pretty good place to start. If you say, how do I optimize the cost of my feed or my fertilizer, we can improve things. That's a good place. We also know that post-harvest losses can be between 10 and 40%. So that's another good place. In our experience, we've also found a lot of value in beginning to work with farmer practices because productivity is so low. Almost anything you do to a smallholder farmer drives up their outcomes almost immediately. But I'm going to share with you a few examples. So if you look at this next slide that we have here, and clearly the text is very small, but the first icon there talks about feed and fertilizer. Like we said, feed and fertilizer drives 70% of production costs. When we started working in the fish sector 10 years ago, the first thing we did is there was nobody making commercial feed in Kenya. So we went to Unga Limited and said to Unga, we want to increase fish farming in Kenya, and there's no good fish feed. Actually, there's no commercial fish feed. And Unga said to us, well, it sounds like a good idea, but show me the fish farmers, and I'll grow the feed. And if you talk to the fish farmers, they say, show me where to get the feed, and then I'll start growing the fish. So what did we do? We went to the Dutch government and asked them to underwrite the upfront capital cost of the biggest fish feed mill in East Africa at the time. The idea was that if you de-risk the cost of entry for market actors, then they can go in and provide products and solutions at competitive prices. So we did that. Tunga was launched in, I think, 2017. I think has been a wonderful success story. And now there's probably 5 or 6 different fish feed mills in Kenya alone, let alone the region. But then anybody who works with livestock farmers knows that farmers like to mix their own feed. They always feel like, I think I can do this cheaper. And of course, they don't appreciate the complexity. At the same time, you're not really going to go to that farmer and tell him, stop mixing your own feed and go buy from the shop. So a few years ago, we were we led a consortium called Feed Tech Kenya that said, fine, we know that the farmer is better off if he buys quality feed. But since he's mixing that feed, why don't we equip him with some practices in how you actually get better quality feed? So in 2018 and 2019 and through 2021, we went across Kenya. I think we were in 12 different counties running workshops and trials for farmers in dairy, in poultry, obviously, in pigs and in fish, and saying, here is how you create quality feed, here is how you get good ingredients, here is how you do your testing, and so on. And that was a very, very successful outcome. Just this year, I think it was in March, we collaborated with ASNET to convene the first roundtable for the fish sector in Kenya. We had over 120 participants, including the academics, including manufacturers, including distributors. The entire feed sector was gathered in a room at the Radisson to talk about how to future-proof the feed sector. And I'm pleased to tell you that the next round that will follow up on this will be happening on the 5th of December. So make sure you all get your invitations to that. One of the last things we're doing around feed or current things is we're in the very early stages of collaborating with Virginia Tech University to introduce affordable spectrometer testing of feed. So that a farmer doesn't have to think about going to a lab 200 kilometers away at a cost of 12 or 15,000 to find out, do I have quality feed here or not? So those are some things we've done around feed and fertilizer, really more feed. Having done that, when we started our work in Aqua, one of the things that was clear was, one, the absence of quality hatcheries. 2, the lack of knowledge. You'll be surprised how many farmers have been sold tadpoles. And then they realize, oops, I thought that if you change your water regularly, your fish is not going to die, and so on. And we found that the key to unlocking opportunity with a smallholder farmer is exactly that. Because at the beginning of this program, which we did with IDH, they were indifferent, like, oh yeah, here comes another program. But by the time we were done, by the time the first crop had come 6-7 months later, the farmers were coming to us and saying, I want 3 more ponds. I want 4 more cages, because they were like, you mean I can make money doing this? And suddenly they themselves were willing to look for the money. So we have done a lot. We are currently working with NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development. In the last 2 years, we've trained several hundred farmers across Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda to say, how do you improve the productivity of your fish? We're working with the European Union to strengthen TVET curriculum in Aqua, and we were actually involved in putting together the strategic plan for the TVET CDAC just a few months ago. So we have a lot going on in farmer practices. And we found that it's not very useful to tell an agribusiness, here is better business practices before you've improved their technical practices. So having improved technical practices, what we found is that you want to start saying record keeping provides the baseline for any improvement. Having standard, you would rather do the same thing consistently, even if it's mediocre, than not have standardized processes. And again, we've seen that enable these agribusiness SMEs to scale. Right now, we are doing a lot of things around market systems. We've just begun a program, a $7 million program to increase the participation by women in cross-border trade in 6 countries, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Nigeria, DRC, and Zambia. And the idea then is saying, having improved the agribusiness, I think we're still on the prior slide, having improved the agribusiness, the next question is, how do I access a market? How do I find markets for this? And so the 2 things we're doing here, like I said, number 1 is we're now working with sector actors to say, how do you help young women participate in the cross-border fish value chain trade? We've been running some programs with the Rockefeller Foundation to improve nutrition by increasing fish consumption in Murang'a of all places and Makueni of all places, and you'll be surprised. I don't have a lot of time, but if I shared with you the outcomes around increasing consumption of fish. But the very interesting layer for us now has been to say to Lakeside women's groups that now you can access, you can sell your fish to schools in Murang'a and Makueni and other parts of the country. And then the last prong, which is going to be my last slide because of the time, is financial inclusion. We've just come out of a 5-year program with USAID. We all know, again, in this room that on the one hand, we proudly say agriculture is 22% of GDP, but then it only gets 4% of bank lending. So how do you increase that? Over the last 5 years, we did 2 things. One is we brought 3,000 lending officers from over 40 financial institutions and said, we will train you in these specific value chains, give you insight into these value chains, because once you understand it, you'll be happy to lend it. And then we went further and said, we're going to work with you to design products for specific value chains, to say that if you're lending to avocados, the most important thing is cold chain because it increases shelf life by up to 100 days. If you're working with mangoes, the most important thing is the fruit fly, and so on. So we've this program enabled the sector to increase lending to agriculture by about $500 million. And just now, in the last few months, we've started a grant fund that is giving $4 million to women entrepreneurs in aquaculture. So what we found is that it is not possible to drive sustainable transformation by attacking a single point in the value chain. But when you have interventions across the value chain, you're able to drive transformation. And of course, the most important part of that is we're not experts in everything. A key part of that is identifying the right partners, the right experts, such as those are seated here. I am going to pause there in the interest of time, and thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joe. Give him a hard clap, a better one. He has, but I believe there's a contact. You have a booth outside?
No, we didn't have a booth, okay. But our website is lattice.africa. We are around here, our team, for the rest of the day. Yep. But if you want to reach out and come to lattice.africa, you will find our email and our phone number.
Thank you so much, Joe,
Thank you very much.
The presentation, and most welcome another time for the network. So we want now to invite Madame Linda to be on stage and take control of the discussion now. And as we agreed, as you promised, keep it as precise, but maintain the quality as you wish. Thank you so much, Linda. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, the moderator, and thank you so much, Joe. We had expected a different presentation, but Joe's presentation has been a good priming for my multidisciplinary powerhouse panel. You will see once this discussion gets underway. We will quickly dive into an introduction of the next panel, which, as you can see from your program, is enhancing resilience in the face of climate change. So I'll allow my panelists to introduce themselves and drive us into the conversation we're about to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. My name is Tito Arunga. I work with the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO. I lead a program on sustainable agri-food systems. And you're asking that I go straight into...
No, thank you. Thank you, Tito.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tito. I think the introduction is sufficient, but you have gone straight into it with your introduction. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Moses Abukari. I work for the International Fund for Agriculture Development. I am a regional program manager based here in our regional office in Nairobi. And IFAD, for many of you who don't know, is stand for smallholder agriculture financing, including MSMEs. And we call ourselves the Agri-Public Development Finance Bank that is exclusively dedicated to the smallholder farmers and agri businesses in developing countries.
Good afternoon. My name is Lilian Wanjiru Mbuthia. I work for Fertilizer Association of Kenya. And the Fertilizer Association of Kenya is the umbrella body that brings together manufacturers, producers, innovators, and all stakeholders in the space of crop nutrition. And our main goal is to promote industry best practices towards promoting research, education, and innovation towards sustainable crop nutrition solutions. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Stephen Mugo. I am right now a consultant, an independent consultant in the area of resilient agriculture, which involves crop improvement, seed systems, and all that. I just recently retired from the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center as a maize breeder, breeding crops for drought tolerance, mainly maize, both maize and wheat. And I would also want proud to say that I'm also a farmer right now with a medium-sized poultry farm. So I really wanted to get that experience as a farmer, the people that I've addressed throughout my life. Thank you.
My name's Khalif Abey, CEO for Kenya Camel Association, and a real pastoralist, and of course supporting pastoralism and livelihood diversification in northern part of Kenya. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Julius Mwebia Mugambi. Formerly, I worked with the Ministry of Agriculture. Then I retired into private sector. I now work with Jofra Agro Strategies Limited, where we have an arm that is doing agri-input supplies, and another one that's doing agri-output processing. So now I've been so lucky to experience both the extension services as well as now in the private sector. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, my panelists. I hope you're all listening. So you can tell my panel comprises think tanks, development partners and financing organizations, fertilizer expert who is keen to talk to us about soil health and crop nutrition, and industry. Mr. Mwebia, who was previously at the Ministry of Agriculture and is currently now the County ASNET Chair. I'd like to start by having Dr. Mugo tell us why it is critical for us to discuss how to enhance agricultural resilience and why indeed agriculture is important. We have had all the different perspectives of why agriculture is key to us, but in the face of enhancing climate resilience, we have just heard from Joe, like I said, he did a very good priming, that 70% of households in Kenya engage in agricultural work. So, Dr. Mugo, could you kindly introduce us to the discussion and tell us why is enhancing resilience important, especially considering the value of agriculture to our economy?
Thank you very much, Rita, for that. And before I delve into that, I forgot to say that in ASNET, I'm a member of the Technical Advisory Group on the research and communication are part of it. Why are we talking about resilience in agriculture? And it is because we are living at a different time. I might be older than some of you today. And I lived in the 1960s when I was young and we were farming. And I was living around Mount Kenya. And every morning that we woke up, we saw snow on the mountain. It was actually covering, I think, more than 3/4 of the cap. Today, I live there, where I live there part-time, and the snow is no longer there. So what am I saying? What I'm saying it is that the agriculture that we are practicing today, we are practicing it in a completely different environment from what it was before. And the part of this is climate change. There may be discussions. There are people who don't believe it. I hear there are big people in the USA who don't believe in it. But you don't have to believe in it. You just need to observe and see what is happening. And the idea is that with time and with the activities, largely what man has contributed, both in agriculture, unfortunately, and also in industry, we have created a situation whereby the temperature in the earth, I think, or reaching the earth is a centigrade rise. To you, that is nothing. When you came into this room, probably it was lower, it was more than 5 degrees difference. But when you look at the global level, the implications are dire, in the sense that you in agriculture, I think, without going into the whole of the science, but in agriculture is one of the sectors that will be heavily affected. And we don't have to wait to see it, we are seeing it, where you have episodes of drought, lack of rain, and also episodes of flooding, which I think is no longer a story, but it is something that we see. But beyond that, there are also other effects. With increased temperatures, you get some organisms, especially the insect pests, appearing in areas where earlier on they were not there, because of the change in the relative humidity and also the change in temperature. And all these will affect not only the crop performance, crop productivity, and even livestock, but it also affects the infrastructure. And agriculture cannot be agriculture without infrastructure. You need the roads to be able to take the produce from one point to the other. You need the other areas that you need. And luckily, I think there is a way to be able to address that. Man, I think, has been given, I am a Christian, so I would say that man has been given quite an ability by God to be able to change things from what they were, with the knowledge that we have and all that. And I think that is why we are, and then I'm meaning probably to say that these effects probably, although they are being caused by industrial actions and industrial activities, most of which are not domiciled in Africa or in the developing countries. They are domiciled in the developed countries, but we will be affected much more because our level of technology may not be able to match them, that they can be able to, in the temperate areas in the developed countries, they can be able to mitigate much easily. So I think in short, that's why we are here. And if we don't do it today, that's what we know, we will pay much more tomorrow. It will be costlier, and it will be more difficult to do tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mugo. Indeed, if agriculture becomes more difficult to do and 70% of the population is working in agriculture, that means our incomes and livelihoods as individuals, as a nation, will be compromised. And we have already started seeing some of the impacts of climate change. So I would like to ask Mr. Abei, if you could share with us what are some impacts and what are some of the worst affected areas that you have seen in your experience and in your observation?
Thank you, Leader. I think if you talk about impact, of course, Dr. has put it well, that the future belongs to us, and we are feeling the heat right now. So in 2020 alone, I think the livestock has been totally affected with over 25 billion Kenya shillings of the loss of the production of the animal loss that we have in northern part of Kenya. And this is just a tip of an iceberg, because this, when you talk about 25 billion, you talk about a Thika superhighway, whereby we should have built more than 2 or thrice of those superhighways if we have put a system down. So that one now goes down to livelihood of the pastoralists who depend on it. If a loss goes to that level, then you can imagine the family fragmentation that it affects, causing the health, social fabrication that is being lost, and also looking at the infrastructure he's talking about that we are losing. So the impact is huge, looking at the climate change that has come in. With also now the flooding, you have seen now the issue of diseases, both across the human and animals, that is being now becoming, because recently we are having the MERS-CoV in camels, Middle East respiratory syndrome that has never been reported in Africa. But what we have got in Kenya is not that severe, but already is a sign that we are going to get more of diseases that are going to come and affect the human beings. So same, of course, with our environment, because right now, environmental sustainability becomes now an issue because of the soil health that we are talking about, because 25 billion loss of those animals, nobody has ever thought of sweeping it off from, and of course incineration being done so that we protect our environment, but we left all this environment, of course, the corpses of those animals to be in the soil. So imagine what level of toxin that we are going to leave into our soil that is going to affect the generation to come. So the impact is totally above the normal, and is going to affect the future generation, because we are not going to put the mechanism to address all these issues. It means that we are going, of course, to carry the cross to the next generation that's going to come. Because I think recently the parliament is discussing about the toxin level in the northern part of Kenya. And nobody has raised it up until to date. And still it's going to be the issue that is going to be affecting all of us in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abei. I think you lead us perfectly into a discussion about soil, crop nutrition, and soil health, where I'd like Dr. Wanjiru to share with us. I think we all assume that the natural result of the loss of this livestock is that we have lost the chance to eat meatballs like we did at breakfast. We do not see the direct linkage to the impact on soil. And we've had the president mention that we have arable land in northern Kenya, but if there is the risk that there might be toxins in that soil, then perhaps we're looking at a loss of potential rather than having potential. So, Dr. Wanjiru, my question to you is, generally, so without a focus, of course, in the assholes, why is soil health important when it comes to climate resilience?
Yeah, thank you, Linda, for that question. And I mean, it's a very loaded question, and I think we can spend a whole day to discuss that, but I'll try to be as brief as I can. So I think we are all aware that soils are very central and critical to our production systems. I think we know that how we treat our soils or how we manage our soils will affect what we get in return. And I think in Kenya, I think we are experiencing the outcome of how we managed our soils in the past. We are well aware that in the past, maybe as he said, in older days, in the 60s, 70s, we could very well produce we could produce, for example, if it was maize in Trans Nzoia, easily produce 8 to even 7 to 10 tons of maize, quite easily with very little input. But right now, it's very, very hard for us even to get 2 or 3 tons of the same. And that's a result of what we have done to our soils. We've not taken care of our soils. I think we didn't look at the broader perspective or the sustainability of it. We enjoyed the productivity without taking care of our soils, without returning back, because whatever you get is already, what you get is what you have. So unfortunately, we didn't take care about what are we returning back to our soils, how are we building our soils, and this is where we are. We know that our soils are degraded. That is a fact that we all know, and we know that is affecting productivity. But the good news is that we are now aware, and there's a lot of initiatives going on to drive back to the discussion about soil health and how do we build our soils to build resilient production systems. And what's the role of building of soil health in this is the fact that if we put into place principles and practices that help us build on the soil health, because soils are critical when it comes to nutrient cycling and recycling, and even as we're talking about climate change, we're talking about emissions, we're talking about carbon sequestration, or in simpler terms, storing back carbon, which affects climate. It's talking about resilience towards disease and pest pressures. It's talking about resilience towards the unpredictable weather patterns that we're having. I think in the past it was very clear, we knew March 15 we are going to plant. It was very predictable. These days we are not sure. And so how do we build ourselves so that even if the weather patterns are this unpredictable and we have less rain than we need, our soils are able to conserve the soil such that we're able to still produce. And allowed me to just mention the initiatives on a broader perspective of what is going on. I think most of us are aware that we recently had a fertilizer and soil health summit. And the focus here, if you can see, that is different from the initial initiatives, the Abuja Declaration, which was focusing more on fertilizer. Right now, there was a very big key focus on soil health. And so there was Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit. And from that, there are 10-year action plans that the heads of states in Africa committed to. And they're very well thought through initiatives on how do we build resilience, how do we build soil health. And allow me to read one of the commitments. One of the commitments was to reverse land degradation and restore soil health on at least 30% of degraded soils by 2034. And so now, right now, the discussions are how do we implement these commitments that we have done, so on a regional level in East Africa and more locally in Kenya. And then the other thing that was a good outcome of the summit was Kenya, there was an agricultural and soil management policy that was actually launched at that. And this agricultural and soil management policy is really focusing on giving direction on how we manage our agricultural soils to increase productivity. And so that will look at areas of how do we go to our soils areas and all that, and how do we increase productivity, and how do we build resilience. There's also currently an initiative to map our soils, which is very critical, because unless you understand your soils, how do you manage them? How do you unless you understand what is lacking, what do you need to change? And so there's an initiative by CALRO and the government being supported by other development partners to map our soils so that we understand our soils, which will then help us to be able to have better management practices when it comes to crop nutrition, or what soil health practices do we need to adapt where, and what focus areas should we have. Allow me to talk about the industry perspective. There's a lot of investments that the industry has taken towards research and innovation to come up with crop nutrition solutions that will enhance sustainability and production. So we are trying to shift towards more balanced fertilization, and instead of focusing on only 2 nutrients, which has really been the main critical issue, is because we're not returning back nutrients to the soil. And that also brings in the aspects of integrated soil fertility management. How do we integrate organic and inorganic, all those. And so we now have a lot of balanced fertilization, crop-specific fertilizations out there. So I think these are just a few examples, and maybe even as we go on, we can talk about approaches that are there. I think yesterday we talked about, I think this was brought about, we are talking about regenerative agriculture. We have climate smart agriculture, so many initiatives there. But how do we bring this down into practical, actionable steps with key uniform messaging so that we don't confuse our farmers? Yes, so let me stop there. There's really a lot we can talk about.
Thank you, Dr. Wanjiru. And I think indeed everyone in the room acknowledges there is a lot that we should talk about, that we could discuss. There is a lot of information that needs to spread. Dr. Wanjiru, you've mentioned the declaration and the commitment to reverse soil degradation by 30%. I think this is critical information for farmers, for them to become aware that the soil is degraded and for them to know what measures to put in place to restore their soils. So, Mr. Abukari, let me come to you and just find out, in your work at IFAD in partnering with smallholder farmers, is this kind of information available to the farmers? And have you been able to establish what level of information and action is required on the part of farmers, awareness to address the degradation of our soil and to respond to the need to transform our agriculture so that we are more resilient?
Thank you very much, Linda. Interesting discussion, and for sure there's so much to talk about, but there's also so much out there that people don't know. Access to information, which is critical. And for us, before I go into detail, let me give some facts, because that also help us in terms of what we are facing an existential threat as human population. Kenya, let me put it in context. Kenyan population now, by 2030, in less than 6 years, you'll be up to 67 million. So if you put that in context, is that the current population is like you importing the whole of the population of Rwanda to Kenya now, that you have to feed them. So what does that mean? There's a lot of pressure here. There's land that are demographic, you have to feed them, and there's animal. When you talk about food, it's not only about crops, it's also about livestock and other things. But the other flip side is that there's also a lot of wastages. According to data by FAO and UNEP, is that every Kenyan wastes annually 99 kg of food. And if you find the value times the population, that equates to the value of food laws looking for money to fund. And I know government spend annually around how many billions on fertilizer, which is not helping. That gives one fact. But globally, what it also means that food loss and waste globally is about $1 trillion. And here, the state of food security and nutrition that IFAD and FAO and others launched indicated that about 750 million people were hungry. Yet everything that we waste globally is $1 trillion. So in Africa, 1 out of 5 people go hungry. So basically, the concept that we are talking about, resilience, it also means that we have to adapt the day we do things to make sure that we feed the population sustainably, we don't degrade the environment, and that's why I talk about land degradation, and also soil health and the rest. So what does that mean? IFAD, our mandate is to provide funding through both government and the private sector. So we look at best practices or technologies that are proven to work in different contexts. We make sure that we have that funding to make sure there's access to information for these farmers who live either in Nandi or live in Kwale trying to produce. Because you have to build the capacity of that farmer in terms of improving knowledge. We also have to make sure that somebody was talking about market. So if you produce, there should be market. So you're just not producing for producers, and the farmer also have to generate income from that. So we make sure that we also bring in the market aspect, and sometimes most of the market aspect come from the private sector. And the private sector cannot do it alone. They also need to be de-risked in terms of, okay, I also want to have raw material. And the raw material for the private sector should cost less. And for farmers, they have produced something, they also want an income. So sometimes there's also a point that we have to negotiate in terms of a fair price, or you can talk about just transition, but what is attributable to the farmer in terms of the cost. So overall, we look at the intervention of trying to reduce the cost of production for the farmers, depending on which agroecological area the farmer is, whether it's in the ASAL or in the high potential, medium potential area. I don't know if the farmer wants to eat. And you and I, we had breakfast here, or we have coffee break. It came from somebody. Somebody has to make that decision. But how do we make sure that we bring that information, technology that is available globally? And this is our mandate. So because we have global presence, we know what is best practice, but we also know technology that are not working, so that we don't import things like a wholesale to an environment that does not make sense, which at the end of the day also affect that context in a certain way. So this is what we try to do. And we also know that in some cases we need policies. We need to intervene with the government to make sure that some taxes, for instance, are also increasing. And I know there's been a lot of outcry that the government want to tax farmers even for soil testing, even for animal artificial insemination, a whole lot of things. It doesn't mean that you want to support the farmer, but you also don't make it so costly for the farmers. So for us, this is an important area that we engage in. We look at what we call a whole ecosystem, and we try to make sure the funding along the value chain and the different actors come into play. Where we have a niche, we focus our niche. Where we know that we don't have, we have to leverage. And that's why for us, partnership also with the private sector comes in strongly, so that sometimes at some point we have to do it jointly with them at the very beginning. And we have one project that we have financed with the European Union, and I know she would talk about it, that we also want to transition farmers from a lot more dependent on chemical fertilizer to bio inputs. And when I started taking the data from the farm, the project, initially 2 or 3 years ago, we have limited companies who were producing, but now I have over 16 or 18, 36 different bio input, both biopesticides, biofertilizer, and you have over 18 companies. And some of them are even doing innovation for the farmers. So what that brings to me now, you talk about access to the information. You need to know where it is. It has to be proven. And it has to be also cost effective, because you don't want to make sure that you spend public money on things that is not more effective and efficient. And we make sure that we provide the bridge, and for us that's the framework we work with, what we call public-private producer partnership as a framework. So when you look at that constellation, it helps us to understand that whatever information that we are making or whatever practices we are trying to provide the funding, it cuts across these layers and constellation to make sure that the end goal or the beneficiary get maximum benefit out of it.
Thank you, Mr. Abukari. Mr. Mwebia, allow me to bring the farmer's perspective into the discussion. So we have heard about the degradation of our soil and the initiatives that are going into ensuring farmers adopt resilient practices. But we had a discussion earlier this morning, and we were informed that the farmer should be incentivized so that they continue to feed us. Mr. Mwebia, in your view, how can we first spread this information to farmers and then incentivize the adoption of these practices on soil regeneration and crop nutrition to the farmer at county level?
Thank you, Leader. Now, before I come to that, I want to talk about the how agriculture can become viable, to how it can remain viable in the face of climate change, so that I'm able to connect it now with how to incentivize farmers and other actors to invest in climate change technologies and adaptation and mitigation. That climate change is with us is no doubt. No doubting Thomas can actually ignore it anymore. We have seen a lot of changes in the ecosystems in just a lifetime. We have seen emergence of new diseases. It has rendered some of the technical information we used to give to farmers irrelevant. And I must say also that now that we have researchers here, I think it's important researchers and extension officers come together, do research, evaluate research, and document new technical approach to extension, because a lot of the messages we used to give to farmers in the past are irrelevant today. For instance, we used to tell farmers to do dry planting as one of the measures, even to conserve soil. You can no longer tell farmers to do dry planting because some of them are planted, the drizzle comes, they germinate, then they dry. And by the way, farmers are now mitigating that by planting without fertilizers. And when they are guaranteed of the crop, then they're able to dig in, which again brings about poor efficient use of fertilizers. And so there's a need for new research and evaluation of extension message we give to farmers today. That how do we ensure that agriculture remains viable in the face of all these circumstances? Number one, we need to ensure that there's availability, access, and utilization of climate information, data, so weather data, and so on and so forth. And I must say that this is where we fail miserably, because a lot of farmers, and of course today I can give credit to our weather forecast. They are a bit accurate today, but in the past, they created an image of not being very accurate, and so farmers developed some skepticism, which persists up to today, and this is hindering consumption of data today, which is very critical in the face of climate change, because then farmers made it big when it comes to utilizing data. And of course, with climate change data, then one is able to predict maybe storms or drought and whatever, and then organize mitigating factors or initiatives early enough and not be caught unawares. We can also maybe anticipate some outbreaks of maybe locust or even armyworms, and then prepare in good time, and we are not getting surprised. So, because this will inform our mitigation and so on and so forth, I must say accessibility is now improved. Not accessibility, but the availability of data is there. But accessibility, I know MED has really tried hard, but I think they need to look for means and ways of making it better, because farmers are not yet consuming those data. Use is pathetic. Farmers don't really use it. I can tell you this because I am there with the farmers, and I know how much skeptical they are. We have tried to advise them to consume these data, and some of them just refuse to use it. And then the second thing I would say is utilization, accessibility, and access and utilization of technologies and innovations. That's the second bit we need to do. And in this one, of course, there are many things we can talk about, but I want to talk about 3 that I think are impactful. I don't have to go through all those technologies we talk about because we know them. We've sung them over and over again. But I want to say when it comes to that, we have technologies. Again, I must say that the session we had in the morning was very important. In access, sharing of data from researchers, from to the industry. There's a big disconnect. There's a big gap there. There's a wealth of information with researchers, with innovators, that is not reaching the farmers. It takes about 5 years for a new innovation to get to the farmers in a critical way, in a critical mass, because the consumption is low. There's a need there, a big need to really find out how we can cascade information and innovations and whatever down to the farmer, because that's where it matters. That's where the road, the tire meet the roads, like they say. And so, like I said, we have all those technologies, but I want to mention just 3 that are very important. One of them is use of drought-tolerant early maturing crops. And on this, I must say that as JUFRA, we are very intentional on this. We are very passionate about it. And we have developing products from drought-tolerant crops. And we have a vision of positioning sorghum in the Kenyan dinner table, blending sorghum and maize, because unless we change our feeding habits and accept the traditional crops, our direction is not very, very encouraging in terms of food security and so on and so forth. And so we need to accept, first of all, the traditional crops. In fact, these days we call them high-value crops because they provide very rich nutrients and so on and so forth. But our feeding habits is really against these, so we need to deliberately go into drought-tolerant crops. That's very important in the face of climate change. Unless we adopt to that, then it will sweep us in terms of food insecurity and so on and so forth. And then the other thing is, of course, adopting some soil moisture conservation in situ. And there are a lot of technologies in this. They are known by extension officers. I don't have to go into them. The structures we do, the fanya juice and so on and so forth, and stone beds and all that. I may not go into all that. But I want to come to adopting conservation agriculture. This is where we need to be very innovative. I know there again, we talk about zero tillage, we talk about a lot of cultural measures we take and so on and so forth. But I want to mention something that we are doing again in Taita Taveta with young people. I happen to be in a project where we are trying to bring young people into agriculture because, again, I believe if we get young people into agriculture, maybe it's one of the things we need to have a high consumption of technologies and ideas because they're able to uptake information and innovations very faster than the farmer we currently have. And so there we have introduced reaping. They are doing minimum tillage, then they do reaping. And that is an amazing way of conserving the little water that comes from the ground. When you space them in 1 meter gap, so that any rain that falls within an area, it will flow, and when it gets to that bed that has been ripped, is sunk deep, you use a ripper and dig deep and make a bed, then all that water within that meter space is sunk in, it percolates and covers the entire area, and then you're able to have a crop that is very healthy and bearing very well. In that way, that's one of the things that I think need to be practiced seriously. That is an area of conservation agriculture. There are many other things that we can talk about conservation agriculture. There are so many other methods we use, but I want to pick on that because it has very good returns, very good impact. Others I know are in public domain, other measures that people use. In the interest of time, I want to avoid all those others. Let me come again to the soil improvement innovations. And on this, again, there are many things we talk about. Because as you improve soil fertility, then you're able to minimize erosion, have good crop cover that helps to prevent the rainfall erosion and so on and so forth. Use of nitrogen fixing plants and so on. But let me come to, of course, use of organic fertilizer is very important, which is sometimes not liked by most farmers, but it's becoming very critical as we see climate change. But let me come to fertilizer, which we usually use a lot. And in this, I want to really challenge the fertilizer actors and the government. This holds a big opportunity to change production. But we've been so traditional that the fertilizers we used in the 60s and the 70s are the same fertilizers in the market when the soil chemistry has changed tremendously. I can tell you this because I do soil testing for my farmers. In the region I come from, I will tell you for a fact that we don't have K in the soil. And when K is lacking in the soil, we know the purpose of K is translocation of water, it to control the stomata, the closing and the opening of stomata, and that is very key to moisture conservation for the crop. It's very important. But you find farmers to this day, and I know there are fertilizers that are addressing this. There are some with K today, but farmers are going back to the fertilizers they have been used to. And my thinking is this: as a government, as policymakers, if today we said okay, and I'm glad Dr. said they are going to do soil mapping. Please, that is very important. It's critical. It's a critical thing. Because if we do soil mapping, and then we prove, like I have found, that K is lacking in the soil, because I can tell you, for the last 5 years, I've done soil testing for farmers, and more than 90% of the result I get is that K is absent. And knowing that K is very critical now in drought resistance for crops, that alone, if we get fertilizer right, it helps a lot in mitigating climate change for our farmers. I'm surprised to this day, even government subsidy fertilizers and DAPs and the NPKs that have only 2 elements of fertilizer, when there are fertilizers for the last maybe 5 years or so that have all the 6 macronutrients the crop requires. And it takes no rocket science for us to know that if you've used, we formulated fertilizers in the 80s, when the soils and all the other macronutrients, except potassium and nitrogen, and so for all this time we've been feeding our soils with only nitrogen and phosphorus, assuming that we still have the K, the calcium, the sulfur, and the rest. But of course, if for all that long we've been mined our soils, those minerals are exhausted. I mean, they are finished. And so we need to change our fertilizers, and that just takes a policy, because if you control that market of fertilizer, I can tell you, you boost our production in a big way. You unlock a lot of production potential for the farmers. So I don't want to dwell on that so much. I wanted to highlight those four, but there are many others we can do in the interest of time, including fodder conservation for our animals, doing hay when we know there's drought. Like I said, it's important if farmers are told there's drought and they believe it, then a farmer is able to do, for example, silage for his camels or his cows, and for 5 years, silage can last that long if you conserve a lot. Sorry, I've not taken a lot of time, but let me come now to what you asked, leader. Sorry, I started with that one, but I knew I had those two questions to add, and I felt that gives me a better sequence of handling it. Then how do you incentivize the farmers and other actors in the private sector to invest in climate mitigating or adaptation measures? Now, I will say this again, private sector is actually the major polluter, because the industries, they're the major emitters of the carbon dioxide and so on and so forth. But one, they have limited understanding. They are so focused on profit making that they're not aware that this climate thing is affecting them, affecting their systems. For instance, when there's a flood, I remember last time we had a flood here, I was picking some things somewhere in the industrial area, and I met a go down flooded, and that entrepreneur had lost a lot of merchandise, and then he was blaming the engineers of the road, not knowing that the road was made in the 60s when the climate was okay, but now things have changed. He's not aware that the things he's doing are also contributing to the climate change that is causing floods and so on and so forth. And so there's little awareness among the private sector, even among the farmers. So the first incentive is number one, to create awareness to the private sector. And as you create awareness, then let bring out the action required for every actor at every level. Bring out the action required for every actor in every level. And then I'll just talk in PowerPoints, because they know have taken quite a while. Then the other thing is there are some legal incentives we can give. We can restrict import and exports. We can do restrictions there, so that in case we know a product will cause emission, we restrict that. We don't have to bring things that will cause emission to the country and so on and so forth. We can also use the awards, like the bodies that regulate. You can refuse some awarding some certification for things that you think were made, and so on. KEBS can control some of the innovations that we think can cause emission and so on and so forth. So there are legal incentives. Those are legal incentives we can use. Then there are price-based incentives. Here we talk about subsidies. You can subsidize where you think somebody is having an innovation that can help mitigate or adoption to climate change. We can use government procurement, so that you restrict your procurement to those that are mitigating. So that's the price-based.
I think you.
The price-based incentives. going off.
Mr. Mwebia, the mic is going to make Mr. Mushoki give me my second yellow card. He already gave me a first yellow. Urging for your patience, we have just one more critical input, kindly.
Sorry, I hope I'm not taking too long, but anyway, let me in a minute or seconds finish this. So I talked about price-based incentives. I've talked about subsidies. I've talked about procurement contracts being awarded to those that are mitigating or adapting to climate change, or the products that do exactly that. And then there are risk guarantees. The actors can be given risk guarantees. And then they can also be assisted to access climate funding, those, especially where the innovation we need to spread around. And then the fourth one and the last one is, there's a last one. The fourth one is information incentives. This is where there's climate data sharing to all decision makers, from farmers to policy makers. These need to be shared so that they can, that's an incentive by itself, because once somebody is given those data, is actually encouraged to implement them. Of course, I talked about the creation of awareness, education and training, because like I said, some of these actors that are creating a lot of emission are not even aware, and they don't know what to do. Education and training is an incentive. And then the last one I will talk about is property right-based incentives. This is where I'm talking about copyright and patents. If I know, if I innovate something that is going to mitigate climate change, I can access my patent very fast, or I can be given a copyright very fast without a lot of struggles. It motivates me to want to innovate and get benefit from the same. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mwebia. I'm urging Mr. Mushoki. My panel is bursting with solutions for many of the problems we have identified here. But I already have a yellow card. I'm told in football a yellow card stops you from playing the next match or something like that. Yes. So kindly do not stop as yet. One more critical input. As my panel was speaking, it sounded to me like what we require is a transformation, of course, a shift in mindset. And there is a concern about, of course, disjointed policies. We're giving subsidy of fertilizer for a fertilizer that is not even solving our most urgent need, because the soil lacks K, but we're giving NPK fertilizer as a subsidy. And I've had concern from several of the speakers since yesterday about the efficacy of that subsidy program in light of private sector investment. So if we don't even go into the legitimacy of the fertilizer itself. And as my panel was speaking, it sounded to me like it gave me a view of what would happen. Someone mentioned Nandi, and I work in tea. I work for Kenya Tea Growers Association, and we have tea producers in Nandi. You might be aware that the tea industry is currently concerned about our levels of tea production. We do not have enough market. So we are pushing as private sector for government to open up markets. But a farmer in Nandi who is realizing that tea might not be so profitable might want to move into sorghum production for its drought-resistant and nutritional value. And Dr. Wanjiru has told us there are several approaches and there are several initiatives that are currently ongoing to ensure that we transition into a resilient agricultural practice. But I think the most important part, which the panel now stands between you and is the eating, the food. And I'd like to ask from the Food and Agriculture Organization, we have seen what the highest risks we face are. We have seen the extent of loss we have suffered. We have seen that we need more nutritious food produced in restored land. What priorities from the perspective of Food and Agriculture Organization, what priorities should we pay attention to as actors in this sector?
Okay. No, thank you very much. I think my fellow panelists have really brought it out, in terms of what is the current context, what is the future context, what are some of the solutions. I mean, the conversation started from, climate change is here with us. The example of the peak of Mount Kenya. And I think one of the most critical issues, we are talking of resilient food systems. What do we mean when we are talking of resilient food systems? You're basically talking of structures, policies, strategies that would ensure we protect our food system. You've had those examples given about fertilizer. The fundamental question, are we at a point we can confidently say as a country that we have the right structures, the right policies, the right strategies to ensure resilient food systems? And when we talk of resilient food systems, we get down to what we call sustainable agri-food systems. What do we mean? This has to be looked through a triple bottom line, where we are talking of the social, the economic, and the environmental. In terms of social, the whole ideas that touch on inclusivity and inclusion, including the inclusion of the most vulnerable communities. You got the example that was said related to the ASALs, the losses that are happening as a result of climate change, what we've lost in terms of livestock. How are we ensuring that in our efforts to deal with resilient food systems, we're ensuring that the practices that we are undertaking, the policies, the structures are getting to the most vulnerable, what I would call off the tarmac. The second thing is then in terms of economics. We know some examples have been given here about the climate smart agricultural practices. That you do the practice, you are able to really ensure that you're doing sustainable farming and also getting a return on investment. There's a lot of work that has been going on in trying to promote climate smart agriculture. Are we also then sure that we have the right policies? And agriculture is devolved. So as we set policies, the cascading of these to counties and turning that into practice, I think is key. We may still have some issues there, and I think it's a high priority. I'll give you an example. For example, there's only one county that has been able to domesticate the policy on agroecological farming practices. I think that is Murang'a County. This, and even at national level, I think there's still a process going on, but Murang'a has been able to domesticate it. I mean, this is something that, if you're talking of regenerative, if you're talking of soil health, there's nothing more, in my opinion, that is so critical for this country. The soil health in this country. As FAO, we've also done a bit of quite some work, and we know that soil health is a big issue in this country. Now, would we confidently say that we've got the policy in place to address this? We have issues there. So these are some of the fundamental things I would want to talk about. But at the heart of this is, you know, for resilient food systems to work, the coordination aspect is key. Over the years, this is okay. Over the years, you know, the forte of agriculture has been work that is done through the Department of Agriculture. Yet when you're looking at resilient food systems, to be able to achieve it, there has to be coordination across different departments of government. You know, the department, say, the Ministry of Water and Irrigation, or the Department of Ministry of Energy, all have an impact on the food system. Can we confidently say that we have the right coordination mechanism in dealing with food systems? And it goes beyond government. I really liked the conversation this morning that was also looking at, you know, how does research and private sector work? But you've got government, you've got research, you've got, I mean, academia, you've got private sector, you have development partners. You know, how is the coordination working to ensure we are moving towards dealing with achieving these resilient food systems? I dare to say that there's really still some work. We've made quite a bit of effort in trying to work closely with government in getting this structure in place. That structure needs to be in place and active working at a level where you've got a structure that deals with the decision making at the highest level, and then at the technical level where you have the technical departments working within government, but also with the different actors. That is the only way we are going to be able to achieve. You know, the conversations this morning, there was a conversation about clustering, establishing excellence, you know, clusters of knowledge around the country. Unless these things come together, you know, the ideas are fantastic, but dialogue and beyond the dialogue, and it was really good that, you know, there was already somebody asking for action, some conversation to already happen to get these things together. I think that this is what we need. The country had already established what we call some food systems pathways. The pathways were looking at a number of things. Climate action was one of the pathways that this country had established. The second one was around the whole issue around women and youth, access to productive assets as one of the ways, especially in dealing with that social inclusion pillar. There was the whole area around digitization as key priority for the country, and you may be aware that we now have what we call the Kenya Integrated Agriculture Management Information System that takes in all the data in terms of farmer registration around the country and the details of what the farmers are doing. I think this is so critical in helping the decision-making processes that can lead us to what we then talk of when we talk of resilient food systems. I think it was also talked about here, the diversity of diets. The diversity of diets as also a key priority. And finally, I think the question of, the partnerships. I've talked about it enough in terms of why we all have to speak to each other across different sectors. So for me, I think these are the very critical priorities we need to consider. And just to say, there's a comment that was made about, what we face when we talk of food loss and waste. You've got a growing population. I think it was said that, what did you say? In how many years would we be talking of an additional population that is, that is like the population of Rwanda. And we did a cost benefit for Nairobi alone, and it is clear Nairobi is the hub. All these hotels, all this. If you take what is considered waste alone, looking at Nairobi itself and looking, whether to invest in increasing production or to reduce waste, the ratio is 1 to 3 in terms of the one investment in reducing loss. You'd have to spend, if you are able to do that, you can save, it would cost you 3 times to increase production rather than trying to manage loss and waste. So you asked me about priorities for this country. That is one of the top priorities that we must deal with. I thank you.
Thank you so much, and many, many thanks to my panelists. I apologize for this very little time they have given us to discuss all these brilliant and scalable solutions that we have. Starting with one, make sure you're not one of the people wasting 99 kilos of food in a year. So we're already going away with one action, each of us as an individual. And then allow me to just summarize 3 takeaways that we hope we will see in the action plan. One panel, but we're already taking 3 out of 10. So first, put in place a well-coordinated structure for resilient food systems. 2, address soil health. In this regard, Mr. Mwebia has pointed out, knowledge is power, and the first win we can have is to make sure the information is with the farmer. Then they will automatically be incentivized to adopt it. Then we can perhaps also reduce the 5 years to 1 year. The 5 years it takes for a farmer to adopt new technologies or new practices. And then we might break out of the trap of producing maize regardless of whether it is economically viable or adequately nutritious. Thank you so much. Thank you, panelists. Enjoy the rest of the summit.
I know there was a question already coming, whether it's a question answer session members, but now we are trying to see whether we can compress this, if you allow, with the next panel discussion, because we wanted to offload one more before lunch, because I know it is a question of understanding all of us, but already I see hands, and we have to manage this also. But definitely after such an interesting topic, a question, immediate question must be there. Maybe we can allow 1, 2, yeah? So that we also give the audience, yeah. So somebody please give the participant there the microphone. Maybe we can take 1, 2. Then in the meantime, we have to agree on how to move forward. We said this is our summit. There are still 3 panel discussions. There are still 3 presentations. Panel discussions are taking longer, it's understandable. And we have to see at one point we start discussing action points later in the day. And then we need also to finish as early as we should. So I think whatever we do now, we can, as we agreed, compress it as much as possible so that we also don't go very deep in the evening, if you allow, because since yesterday we have this 1.5 hours trying to catch up, but still we are adding some more, and it's clear that it is necessary to go to the detail also, yeah? So maybe 1, 2, Linda, if you can respond to this, then we agree whether we have delayed lunch or maybe no lunch, and we can agree. Thank you. Anyway, on a lighter note.
Okay, thank you. My name is Ruben Chumba, Director of Agriculture, Vihiga County. Mine may be a comment rather than a question, but I wouldn't mind a response in regard to what I've heard about subsidies. You know, the Murang'a County government and Vihiga County government have done an agroecology policy. Actually, the one for Vihiga is the best quality in terms of agroecology in Kenya. In that policy, there is a very, very clear specification on what a subsidy entails after soil testing. You test the soil before you recommend what type of fertilizer to issue to farmers. It may not even be fertilizer, it may even be another type of subsidy, it may be another type of input, not necessarily fertilizer. But really, my question was, there are so many policies, and I heard it yesterday also, that address the same issue, the same challenges, and the same farmer. Like in our research, we have found out about 20 to 21 policies that address food security. Others come from soil health, others come from marketing, others come from all the spectrum of food security you can imagine. Now, my question was to the panelists, or maybe to the organizers of this conference, with thanks. Is there a way you can assist counties to really remove these policies from the shelves, either in Nairobi or wherever they are, and you harmonize them to speak with one language? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to the panel. I have one simple point that I think can be addressed quickly. Is on the question of energy access for agricultural production towards building resilience, especially when you're looking at things like irrigation. And here I would like to correct, yesterday I was on the panel and I said 10 megawatts instead of 10 kilowatts. Power access to clean energy for farmers is a big challenge. How can we move towards that? And then to Bonatito, you nailed it down on coordination. And we also had some suggestions yesterday, but how can we start to build towards that structure that works so that we can really start to coordinate? Because one of the biggest problems is that everyone is doing their own little thing, but there is no coordination. So maybe if there are quick inputs on that, I think that would be useful. Thank you very much for the nice discussions.
Okay. No, thank you, and Chumba from Vihiga. Indeed, yeah. Vihiga also has the, sorry about that. I knew they were in the process, but if it's been finalized, that's really great on your agroecological policy. On your question, you talked about how then development partners, or how can some of these policies be cascaded? I think there's already a lot of effort. There's some effort. Like yeah, no, this is okay. So let me just, we've got policies, we've got structures. So currently, we have what we call the National Food Systems Steering Committee that then cuts across the different departments. Almost, I think there are 12 to 15 departments, under the level of PS and above. So we've got the Cabinet Secretary is the convener of the food systems transformation agenda. So then we have that level of the steering, then we have a technical that brings technical people from the different departments. So FAO has worked very closely with the government in starting to get this structure. And there's already processes of disseminating that to the counties so that can also be a system that cuts across. Some work under what we call urban food systems. If you talk to the people from Kisumu County, they will tell you that they already have what we call a food systems liaison advisory group within the county. So already, and Nairobi has the food systems directorate. So that already brings together different departments at the county. So this, in terms of structure, ideally this is what should cascade across. And I hope in the course of time that will be achieved. Because within the agriculture sector, the structure is already very clear. You've got the CASCOM, yeah? But now we are talking of the food systems that brings different departments also together. Not just people, actors within agriculture, but different departments across. So that's critical, and I hope that will be achieved. On the issue of what are some of the works being done in getting policies devolved, maybe I'll give Moses.
No, thank you very much. So just to mention about the question on subsidies. So let's be clear here. Subsidy also has a political economy attached to it. But the whole idea of subsidy is that you want to make sure that farmers have access to information or input or technology at a much lower rate compared to if on their own capacity they will not be able to access those information or technology. But you can use subsidy in a smart way for the intended purpose. So now we are talking about resilience. If you want farmers to adopt green technologies, you can make it easy. That's where subsidy comes in, initially cost to cover it. But if it stays on and becomes perpetual, then it has a different intention than what it is. We have been, I mentioned about a project we're working with the EU on trying to develop private sector through an e-voucher platform where we do give them a bundle of input through the agro-dealer network. And what we see is that we also, from that subsidy program, we have also a lot of rich of data that we know what is happening. So in intense, we don't provide what we call a blanket kind of input everywhere, which for us, we also don't believe in that. Here, the opportunities that the government can regulate the quality of the input and you regulate the private sector in terms of what comes in. So if there's anything that is not working, the government can take action. And in that kind of a project, there's an element that I want to mention because also linked with the access to data. What we've done an impact study, we realized that the resilience, what we IFA developed called resilience design and monitoring tool, or you can say resilience scorecard or index. We did a baseline in 2021 and realized that among the control and the treatment, at the baseline, the control group had a resilience of 13% and the treatment had 35%. But when we repeated it in 2022, we have significant, the treatment had 76% resilience index compared to 58% of control. And I mentioned also you can cascade it looking at it at geographical areas. I mentioned Nandi, Nandi, Kilifi, and Trans Nzoia. When we did the baseline, they had resilience index of less than 20%. Now, when we repeated it, the resilience has gone up to 70%. Because you use that tool also to help in terms of planning. So if something is not working, it helps us to see what kind of intervention that we came here and what is adaptable to the context. It's not what is generically applicable. It's what is adaptable to the context. So you have a whole toolbox of innovation and technology that you adapt to make sure but you also have a tool to monitor. So over time you can understand what is changing or not so that you can focus on the needs of that particular context. In terms of the cascading of the policy, I think it's really relevant, and that's why I also know that there's an intergovernmental relation, CASCOM, to coordinate and harmonize this process. So we will continue to advocate for the effective delivery or even effective functioning of this platform, which also provide opportunity for private sector to have an active role. So that we make sure, like you rightly said, we don't want policies that are inimical to the needs of the farmers at the local level. Policy is supposed to be enabling environment. And we have to make sure we streamline them. Thank you.
I think that is, well, it can go on and on, Moses. I can tell you, we are talking about a heavy topic, isn't it? You know, resilience in the face of climate change is not something we can conclude here, but I think if you allow Linda, we can stop there. Let's give them another hard clap. I think this is really, again, intensive and a very good delivery from a panelist. And thank you, Linda, for organizing it very well. And we appreciate it. I think now we can break the panel, and we are really appreciating this. I think follow up in the networks, in the emails, you know, in the mailing list. There are many, many things that we can do in this summit to further develop this discussion, isn't it? Now, we come at a time where we have to make the decision. It's our summit again. I'm informed now lunch is ready. So I think, in my view, we better go for lunch, isn't it? Instead of pushing it, because a panel discussion is taking longer than what we anticipated. And we wanted to call now Waithera with the team, but let's go for lunch. And if you allow 30 minutes and we come back, we'll try to compress what is remaining, 3 panel discussions, yeah, and 2 presentations. Then we go to the action point. I believe this will be possible if we all cooperate and compress everything but maintain quality. Thank you so much. I kind of dictated that. I didn't ask you what you think, but let's go for lunch now. If somebody, maybe you can show by hand, the ushers are in the room. If you don't have a meal voucher, please let it be known now. Gladys, please show your face a bit. Gladys will sort you here. It is somewhere in the registration. Just that you have a meal voucher, go for lunch, and 30 minutes, please. That will be like 5 minutes to 2. We are all back so that we help to finish early. Cooperate, please, so that we finish as early as we can. Thank you so much.